Very good. Well, welcome everybody to this regular called meeting, regular called workshop for the Temple City Council. It is currently about 5 minutes after 2. Item 1 is to consider public comments. Any citizens who desire to address the council listed on this workshop agenda may sign up prior to this meeting. Public comments will be received during this portion of the meeting. Please limit those comments no more than 3 minutes, and no discussion or final action will be taken by the council. Mr. Chandler, are you going to speak on, I guess you are going to speak on the, the item that Mr. Lopez is here for?
Yes.
I guess what,
Number 8.
is it a public hearing or? I know that Mr. Lopez can speak during the public hearing. Do we know also he signed up to speak during this workshop also?
Yes,
Is there an avenue for him to do that on the regular meeting agenda?
Could speak during the public comment section of the workshop. I will note that I think after some probably concerns like Mr. Lopez's, as we've talked through some with some council, we may consider, you may want to consider tabling this item so that staff can continue to work with the developer and we could bring this back in January. But then one thought that just came up today, and I think, David, did you get a chance to talk with the developer about that?
I spoke to Mr. Wells just a few minutes earlier when the first meeting started there, and he indicated that he understood if there was a desire to put some more time in there and that it wasn't going to put him in an adversely impacted place to wait until January. So he was okay with that.
I think Mr. Lopez still has the
Sure, of course.
right to speak, but I do think that then you may hear a motion today to table that item because we don't have a site plan at this point, and we may want to try to work with Mr. Welch to get something a little bit more specific for your consideration.
Okay. I saw your email, Brian.
Oh, that's showing me.
Yeah, no.
Yes,
Yes.
I did too.
Okay.
I was on it too.
No, that's not your email. Brian, I saw your email that Jessica also read. And so are you going to cover that today? You want to cover any of that or?
It's up to you all. I can go
You know what,
over that.
Yeah, let's do this.
certainly
Let's go ahead and cover that.
Okay.
If you have
Sure.
part of the slide, right? And that way, while Mr. Lopez
Yes,
is here,
well, Mr.
he
Lopez.
can see that. And then at that point, then Mr. Lopez, any further comments that you might want to make after this presentation, after you've seen the presentation, then we'll do that.
Great.
That'll work?
All right, sounds good. And Mr. Lopez, I know you attended P and Z, and so there have been some other slight changes just in terms of this process evolving with the applicant. So sounds like more discussion can be had though. And, oh, yes, sir, Mr. Lytle.
Told me I wasn't supposed to talk about the items here till today.
Okay, I'm sorry. You're
That's
right.
Okay, that's cool. I understand. You're probably tired of hearing me say this, but, and I know we've already got the money and the grants and all that for these signs, but I've lived in my neighborhood for 11 years and I've never had any trouble finding my home. So I don't know why I would need a sign telling me I'm in my neighborhood. But hey, that's where it is. The one I want to ask about, I know you can't respond to it, is item T on the consent agenda. Says we're gonna extend the, got the wording now, extend, not give the county the location for their new annex for another year. And I was just curious, why? I mean, you can't answer me, so.
Well, we can talk about factual items.
Oh,
It's
good.
on the agenda, so you can say whatever you want to say.
Okay.
It's items that aren't on the agenda that you're restricted in talking about.
We are, we're just simply, number one, we're continuing to acquire those properties. And number two, the county actually would like to delay that because they're trying to figure out what their building costs may be to build an annex there. And they're in the process of getting estimates for their annex in Killeen. And they're going to use those numbers then to figure a budget for the Temple Annex. And so for the convenience of the county, we're delaying into next year.
Okay.
Which we were supposed to have already turned that over to them last year. So this is basically a 2-year delay.
Thank you, sir.
But it's not at our, we're not dragging our feet on it,
Okay,
okay?
thank you.
I think the only thing I would say is up to a 2-year. I think while it authorizes the potential that it will be another year before, I don't, in my conversations with the county, I do not anticipate that you'll use the full year. So while they need a little bit more time, they may not need the
Yeah.
full year, but just for, cleanliness, we just,
Right.
ease of paperwork, we just are recommending pushing everything out a year, but maybe it's 3 months or 4
Sure.
or 5 months that is.
But per our agreement, per the agreement with the county, the land was supposed to be turned over by the end of 23, and then again by the end of 24, and that's not happening. That's all that is.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll close public comments and we'll move on to the regular meeting agenda, which, Brian, while you're standing, why don't you go ahead and then we'll go back to any other agenda items.
Okay, sounds great. So the item that's before you and on the regular agenda is this almost 20 acres, just less than 20 acres at Prairie View and Split Pea Road, which you'll recall is the former alignment of North Pea Ridge. And so just a brief overview, this is a planned development, multifamily one. The applicant intends to do townhomes similar to what they've done immediately to the north, which is called Northridge Townhomes, with some slight differences, which we'll go over. But they wanted a little more flexibility in terms of what happens with the market, maybe some multifamily, but that is not what they're intending to do. So, could townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, which is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the residential service and services designation. This would include, you see in the red, neighborhood service. At this point, it would be a minimum of 3 acres, a maximum of 5 acres. Once again, just trying to be able to give some flexibility for whatever the market may dictate. And so some details, multifamily one allows a residential density of up to 15 dwelling units per acre. What is agreed upon and proposed at this time with the developer is a max of 12. And so when you do the calculation of the maximum acreage, when you take out, so the 5 acres of neighborhood service, or excuse me, 3 acres of neighborhood service, which is the minimum, leaving almost 17 acres of the green, would be a maximum of 204 dwelling units. And so other conditions with the PD include limiting height along the north, south, and west boundaries to 2 stories. That's obviously adjacent to the residential, but also addressing buffering and screening. And so we'll get to the conditions in just a moment. I didn't include all the photos, but the key photos, including Mr. Lopez's house, the blue house, top left, which they constructed recently. It's been within the last couple of years or so that has been completed. And then just other homes in the area along Dewberry. And adjacent development to the north, top right, that's probably the best view of the Northridge townhomes, which are 20-foot lots. What they are proposing is a minimum of 25-foot lots, which does give a little bit more, a little bit more space for everything from addressing solid waste issues that, quite frankly, have been created in this development just because of the fact that and I'll show you Adelaide Drive. It's at a T. So for solid waste, it's a challenge for solid waste to be able to turn around. There's a dumpster up there that neighbors have complained about. So either way, we're working with the developer to address that, but also with this development to be able to have individual cans, and having a 25-foot wide lot really gives enough space for the cans to be spaced individually. And so that's just something to point out. Now let's move on to this slide. And so you can see in terms of responses from neighbors in addition to Mr. and Mrs. Lopez here at this corner who, have disapproved of the project and have given very detailed response and very informed response. And then also neighbors on the other side of the proposed development along Prairie View.
Brian, just one second.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, the 84 is Mr. Lopez.
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
Yep.
First, 86, which is that the empty lot,
Let's see, good
beside the house,
question.
beside the house?
I think it's these folks.
So that house owns the lot to the left of it, that I think that's on.
Okay.
part of it. I think there's a gully that goes through there, and then I think
It's on.
the city has spent tons of time trying to fix that flow. The other side, I think, belongs to somebody else. I'm not sure. There's a gulch there. If you can, it runs off right where the edge of the black line is. Where the city is, no, back this way, all the way. Yep. There's a gulch there where the city, there's flooding problems and they spent a lot of time trying to redo that
That-
drainage system in there.
That low area there is on that one property that belongs to that house, though. I was just wondering why that was undeliverable.
No, sorry, it's more of an undecided.
Oh, I thought it said undeliverable.
Oh, no, that is undeliverable. No, you're right. So good question. We'll look into that.
'Cause I don't know what y'all,
Cheryl?
When we get the addresses from the tax appraisal district and it wasn't a good address.
so that meant, because I'm pretty sure it belongs to him.
Okay, yes. So, yeah, so the way, we generate just based on the map, the addresses. And so if there's an address that is, doesn't have a home on it, they still may try to deliver it. So sometimes we're able to consolidate, but in this case.
So you're saying 85.
86 belongs to
86.
85.
Yeah.
86 had a house on it before we wanted the road.
Oh, that's right. I remember now. Yeah.
That's up to the drain field.
And just briefly go over the conditions. So we've got it in 3 different sets of conditions: general for the overall development, neighborhood service section, and then the next slide is for the MF1 portion. And so, 1 and 2 are pretty standard, but number 3, in terms of buffering and screening, to protect the privacy of the neighbors. And we worked with the developer to try to address something specifically now, but the bottom line is we don't know, other than there needs to be buffering and screening from neighbors existing and future. And so that's why I put in protect the privacy of the neighbors, just to make sure the purpose is understood. So you can't just put up a 6-foot wall and have that really buffer and screen. Needs to be, looking at if it's 2 stories to be able to prevent the new residents from being able to look in the backyards of the previous or existing residents. So 5-foot sidewalk along Split Pea Road. And there have been discussions with the developer and, David's leadership too, just about what are we gonna do with Split Pea Road? And so depending on that development, there may be portions that it makes sense for us to abandon, but preserve small sections for access, but that's still to be determined. Let's see, detailed site plan, number 5, just once again, addressing the buffering and screening, but also requiring elevations, because there is a condition in here that you'll see consistent with the Northridge townhomes requiring variation of elevations. And that is something that, we can really only confirm with the elevations at the time of the site plan review. So the developer is absolutely fine with that. And so to be consistent with other PDs recently, to make sure that the departmental experts had an opportunity to review the site plan and have a discussion about it before they submit for permit, but not requiring it to come back to Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, unless, and this is something that Mr. Lopez, that we just added today and working with the developer and hearing concerns that, if it were a multifamily use, because this, in the comprehensive plan, multifamily, is correctly pointed out, I think by your wife, the comprehensive plan for this, designation, residential and neighborhood services, does not call out multifamily. It calls everything up to fourplexes, more than fourplex. That's technically multifamily. So in order to address that, to say if they decide to go to multifamily, that a formal site plan would come back to P and Z and council, not just go to the administrative level of DRC. Number 6, this is related to their development to the north, and this is unusual, but the developer agreed to it. Relocate the dumpsters from the Northridge, or dumpster enclosure that's on the north end. It's along the north end of Augustus. There's Adelaide, and Augustus is the north-south. Hammerhead Road dumpster right now is at the very edge of that. But the developer agreed that with this development, they would move that dumpster with Augustus, the extension of that, and be able to have it in a better location.
It's
So-
really nice of him to do. I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
That
Looking for a
backs up
solution.
to another subdivision in cul-de-sac that was troublesome for those folks who had already built and, were living there. So I appreciate Mr. Welch making that move correct.
Yep, absolutely. And then also just agreement to put sidewalks where they're needed, connecting to parks, connecting to retail, connecting to other public sidewalks on P Ridge, Split P Ridge. That's where whatever is maintained as public. There still need to be sidewalks there. The developer has agreed to those. And then the neighborhood service section that, we talked about that, but it's a minimum of 3 acres of neighborhood service, a maximum of 5. Compliance with the neighborhood service district standards and landscaping, that's standard stuff. But the multifamily, so compliance with MF1 district standards, except the density limited to 12 dwelling units per acre as opposed to 15. Variation of building elevations and colors that we talked about. Minimum lot width of 25 feet for the townhomes. And once again, that really comes back to solid waste, to have enough room to have an individual trash can. And then parking ratio, this matches the Northridge Townhome PD, 2.5 spaces per dwelling unit. So each of them would have 2, but they would have some overflow parking spaces within the development. And 5, this one is very specific, but we worked it out with the developer to make sure that it was feasible. Driveways, parking in the front yard limited to 52% of lot frontage. And essentially that is because they would plan to have some 35-foot wide townhome lots, and to be able to have 2 driveways with 2 garages, or a 2-car garage. So that's a design that they're looking at. So to be able to have essentially 18 feet, 2 driveway widths, that you do the math, 18 of 35, that's not 50%, it's 52. So that's where that number comes from, very specific, but to essentially make sure that there's green space in the front. Front yard setback may be reduced to 10 feet if the parking or the access is at the rear of the lot, so that is only in that condition, and that's not something that they are proposing, but if it were to work out, then if they're gonna have parking to the rear, then the building can be closer to the street because the parking does not need to be accommodated in the front. The connection to Hammerhead Road, Augustus Drive, extending that, and we talked about that, and that's where the dumpster enclosure would be relocated. Landscape materials along perimeter street include, trees at 50-foot spacing, 2-inch diameter breast height. That is similar to Northridge. The minimum 1 tree in front of each dwelling unit. The compliance with the entrance and entrance and subdivision design standards, which would require a minimum of 2 improved widened entrances, or just 3 regular ones, which would most likely be 2 on Split Pea Road, and then 1 on Prairie View, because we would also require 1 on Prairie View to be able to disperse traffic more evenly. And then no residential driveways on Split Pea or Prairie View Road. And then the last one we talked about, limiting height to 2 stories along the north-south and west sides. And so that's what we currently have.
Very good. Chelsea, anything for Mr. Chandler?
If I may make just a few comments kind of based on some of our recent conversations. So I think, as council will recall, I think Brian used to say this with every presentation, but he thinks probably we have it memorized now, but a planned development is a flexible zoning, right? And so it is intended to allow the developer and the city to work together on maybe, it often incorporates mixed use, as you see here. But it, instead of a straight rezoning for just multifamily or neighborhood services or residential, it can give you more flexibility. But what it comes with, in kind of exchange for or in conjunction with that flexible zoning, it requires a detailed site plan. That's part of what makes it a planned development. And as this group knows, and I think as you have encouraged us over the years and staff certainly supports, we have tried to be, one of our strategic goals is to have smart growth. And so we have tried to be very flexible and very considerate of how we're growing and being not closed off to that and trying to facilitate good, smart growth. And so what we have done over the years is a lot of times the detailed site plan is getting separated out from the land use portion of the decision. So you're really having kind of the land use portion and then deferring the review of the detailed site plan. And council will recall that historically, those detailed site plans always come back to you for review, which has caused some issues in the past because one that I'm thinking of is that apartment complex. I don't remember the name of it, but off of Cedar Road, Cypress Creek, where you've approved the land use. So you've approved that an apartment complex or a multifamily development at that location is acceptable. And then sometimes years later, months to years later, the detailed site plan comes in and the site plan is coming back, and surrounding residents understandably don't understand that what you're considering is not whether or not an apartment complex is allowed there in that example. It's simply reviewing the site plan, whether appropriate buffering is occurring, where dumpster location may be proposed. And so staff in trying to not create issues where there's confusion and where there gets to be a point where you feel like your hands are tied and you're not able to really make there's already, whether it's this council or it's been a few, the other one I can think of was more like in the Hogan Road area. I can't remember, but that zoning existed and you guys were not making a decision on whether or not it was an allowed use. You only had at that point authority on the site plan. So in this proposal, for example, we are recommending, or the recommendation that's on the table at this moment is that detailed site plan, instead of coming back through the whole process, because again, it just kind of creates an expectation that you can change the land use when you're really making the land use decision now, it goes back through just the administrative review process. But the burden that places on us, you as the council ultimately, and then of course staff in trying to make solid recommendations to you, is without seeing a detailed plan, without seeing the plan part of the plan development, we're trying to come up with all of the conditions to recommend to you, and you're having to think of all the conditions for all of the different, things that you would have to consider. And we, of course, I think we all try to do a thorough job of that, but until you really see what's being proposed, you may not know to think, oh, well, where's that dumpster gonna go? If you didn't even realize that, when I think of townhouses, I don't think of dumpsters. I think of 96-gallon carts getting rolled out, so I think, that's part of, in some of the very, very, today, recent conversations I've had is, where's the right line for us to be in terms of how much of the site plan needs to be ready when you make the land use decision versus separating out the land use decision and deferring the site plan to a future time, and who is the appropriate body to, whether it's an administrative review or not. And it just, I don't know that there is a one right way, but it may be that we need to kind of consider that in most cases, the site plan needs to come with the zoning and not be deferred later. But I haven't had a chance to even talk about that at all with Brian. So, one thing that might be helpful for tonight is if we deferred this, especially since Josh, it sounds like that's not going to put him in a bind. We defer this to the next council meeting. Staff can have a little bit more conversation and then maybe bring back something a little more thorough to you by the time you're considering this.
Brenda, I think you have enunciated so clearly. In my 8 years on council, my biggest frustration. And I couldn't have told you what it was until you just enunciated it. Is there any way that we could attach timing for a site plan and before, if they're going to be separated, timing? The frustration is when a site plan has occurred and considerably later a PD comes in and you have residents abutting that knew nothing about it because it's been a long time. Is there maybe that's for Kathy also, legally, any way to control any of that?
Timing's a little more challenging, but Kathy,
I mean, I think that is kind of, part of what I'm saying is we've been very flexible. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be flexible, so
No, I
don't hear
understand.
that as the message.
No, I
But we
don't.
have been, in my estimation, extremely flexible in saying, bring the site plan, we will approve the land use, and the site plan is deferred to some future time frame. I mean, I think you could draw a line of saying, I'm not comfortable approving the PD until I have the site plan to approve at the same time. And in lieu of that, maybe there's a way that we can get to a point of what you're saying is if it's not at the same time, maybe it's within. That is, again, one of the reasons I'm kind of hoping we could get maybe just a little bit more time, because again, I haven't had a chance to talk with Brian about
Sure.
this.
No, I understand.
So I'm hitting him cold. But I mean, we have talked about the issue related to site plans coming back and the confusion and really just, there's really nothing good that comes out of it at that
No,
point.
there's not, because
So-
another development has been developed if it's a long
Yes.
time frame.
And it could be an entirely different council in some
Oh,
cases,
no.
so
Almost forget the council,
Mhm.
think of the new
as a
residents.
resident, for
That's
sure.
my concern, is they knew nothing about it. Now, obviously, when they say, I want to look at empty land, that's a no starter. But when there's really such a time frame between the two, it can really, I mean, how many times have we sat in council and listened to residents' absolute horror and frustration? And we can understand it. If there's any way we can begin to think about that, I would advocate that.
Thank you. The other thing that, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say something else that we mentioned, when I was visiting with Brennan Davis, that we've kind of lost all the low hanging fruit, all the green space
Yes,
out and
we
about.
have.
You know, now we're dealing with slivers of land within the city with surrounding, not complications, but there are other, folks we need to take into consideration.
Yes, yes.
So I think what Brenda's saying is exactly what we need to do. We need to see the site plan, at least some form of a site plan.
Yes,
before we make that kind of
absolutely.
decision.
It's good.
That is what I was gonna say. I think as we move forward, we're gonna see more and more, infill, you know, and I'm not talking about individual lot
No, I
infill,
know
but more,
exactly
you know,
what you mean.
tracks, and I think that just makes, Brian and his team's job that much more complex to consider, you know, not just how a development kind of out in the middle of a field is going to, work out, which has enough considerations, you know, on its own, but, incorporating, you know, again, this phase, previous to it, the fact that there's a dumpster, you know, that's backing up to existing residential, and just all of those little things you can't know, really, you can't expect a person to think about until they've seen, you know, well, what are you even planning here? So that we can really understand the full impact. And it's just, you know, I think Brian and his team do an amazing job of trying to
Absolutely.
capture as many of the conditions as possible, but there becomes a point where it's just, there's unknowns.
Right.
And so especially with some of these more intimate developments that are within already developed areas, it may be more helpful to see, not, again, I'm not advocating for not being flexible, you know, but maybe there's something, you know, when we put our heads together that we can come up with some ideas that, because at least what I've heard from some of the conversation is just some concern about the unknown, you know,
Yes.
I mean, obviously, you know, we understand that we need more housing, the answer can't be no, but we also need to protect and make sure it's compatible with the surrounding development, and just making sure that we are thinking of all of the things that need to be thought of.
Yeah, thank you. And Brian, thank you for stressing the screening if you've got 2-story, looking down into backyards. We went through so many head-ups with that. We've learned.
We have.
Very good. Anything else? Anything for Brian, council? Okay. Mr. Lopez, would you like to speak to us?
I really thank you guys for listening. My wife is a lot more finished than I am. So what you guys got in an email from her is barely even a tip, a tiny bit of concern that we have. A little bit about myself. I bought this property with the understanding that all of that land was never going to be sold to a developer, per Bethune, who owned that property for many, many years, 30+ years, I think. When the previous buyer came in, he was related to the people that own the horse ranch. He bought that to give to his kids, he said, to turn it into horse stables and a picking farm for people in park space, never to develop it. I went ahead and turned down an offer from him to sell my lot to him, and I decided to build my house there. I spent every last dime I had. I built that thing by myself. All by myself. The things that my wife put down as concerns are, of course, my concerns as well. And to say that this development that's proposed here is cohesive to any of the surrounding property is so mind-blowing, because you cannot say that it's cohesive with the development at Northridge, which isn't even finished yet. Which to me, I probably shouldn't say this, looks like Section 8 housing to me.
You're saying Northridge does?
Yeah, absolutely. It is so budget, it is so packed in there. I drove through, I took pictures for my wife to send in. There is 90% of the driveways are concrete, the front of the houses, the condos, whatever they are there. There is almost zero green space. The meter is stuck at the front door. And look at what people around here have spent on their homes. All around this. Back up in here, there's $500,000 homes a block away. Now, I've lived here now, I've moved in a couple years ago. The traffic is getting absolutely crazy. The amount of kids walking this road right here after school blows my mind to think that this is gonna be covered with 200 units. 200 more. If every family that lives in there has one kid, that's 200 more kids either attending the high school, the middle school, or the new elementary school. That's crazy. That is so over dense that it just blows our mind that the Northridge even got approved. And so being concerned about what I put into my house, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and what I do. I'm a full-time mission work is what I do. The tornado hit Temple. I spent 70 days straight cutting trees for all the people in Temple. Then I started rebuild. I rebuilt fences. All of this is volunteer work.
Mr. Lopez, we normally keep these to about 3 minutes. So, I mean,
Okay, so the hurricane hit.
kind of find a good landing place.
I ended up in Houston. I did 8 weeks in Houston. I went to Oklahoma for the tornadoes that just hit, and I just got back from Valdosta, Georgia, doing hurricane repair. I raised money to volunteer. I don't have the money to fight any of this. But to me, I think it definitely, I'm not opposed to developing single family residences. More power to you. You can fit 20 acres, 4 houses per acre. Wonderful. We're not stupid. We didn't think that someday down the line, someone wasn't going to develop this. But to put condos in there, or not even that, please, all of you should drive by the Northridge and take a look. I don't even know how a fire engine is going to get up that street. I'm a builder. Built for 30 years. I fear for those people.
You're talking about the people in Northridge.
If there's one car on each side, you can't get through. It's, you're dipping and dodging. And if that, they're saying that that's not what they're gonna do with this, but they want this gigantic overview of what's gonna be acceptable. And like she just said, I think that this plan needs to be like much smaller. 20 acres is a lot of homes. Quarter acre per. That to me is very overpopulated for this area. There's 900 homes across the street from me. More homes to come all the way down that. This is supposedly already commercial, right? Where's the entrance gonna be to this neighborhood off of Prairie View? Right next to my house? I just don't know how that fits. So I would really consider traffic zones where there were accidents and stuff that they brought up in the last meeting. I think we're in a world of trouble. We have a crossing guard down here. The amount of kids running in and out of here right now is crazy. And I'm concerned about it.
Okay. Good. Thank you for your input on that. Very much appreciated. How's anything else, Mr. Chandler, before we move on? All right. Very good. Then let's continue with item 1. Council to discuss any regular meeting agenda items for tonight. Just real quickly, my understanding then from conversations that we've had is we are going to postpone item 8, right, to the January 16th meeting.
Using the correct terminology.
I know.
Red table.
I know, I
know.
was scared to ask.
Y'all are welcome. It's only taken
He's
7
right, it's postponed.
It's only taken 7 years. You're welcome. And then item 9, same, except we're going to postpone that one to the February 6th meeting.
Item 9,
Yes, ma'am. So
February 6th.
8 to January 16th, 9 to February 6th. Those are the ones that I know of.
And we're also postponing to a date uncertain, item number 5.
Are we gonna have an event on that?
Because of the change in.
Number 9 will be again.
What?
Number
First
5.
meeting in February.
The public hearing, they're actually partnering with a different housing foundation, and we didn't find that out until after the agenda was created. So they said it's not time sensitive, and they have a conflict on the January 16th meeting, so it will most likely be the first meeting in February. But
You're talking about number 9, Kathy?
number 5.
Oh, 5.
Hearing.
Oh.
Right.
Right.
So just to a future date. That was postponed meeting.
It'll just be to an uncertain date.
January.
January 16th. Number 8 is January 16th.
What is 5 again?
5 is
February 6th.
February 6th.
Thank you.
And 9 is February 6th.
Hold on. 5
Definitely.
is to an uncertain date.
8
8 is the 16th, January 16th, 9 is the February. Okay, council staff, anything else on the consent or what's left of the regular?
Mayor, I would just note item W on the consent agenda is adopting the legislative priorities that we discussed, I think, in our last workshop, and we do have a printed version of the document in front of you.
Good.
Reading pleasure.
This is something that can be shared.
Absolutely, we would encourage that, and we can get extra copies.
Can I get additional copies?
Yeah. Yes, in there.
I do have some other additional hard
Oh,
copies if you
thank
wanted
you.
that, but I will distribute it.
So, yeah, send that to everyone
Yes, sir.
digitally. That'd be handy.
We gave us it.
And Stacy will be back on the 16th in workshop to provide the detailed position papers that we talked about, the priority position, and give you a preview of anything we know at that point. The session will have just begun. And then at your request, we will also do regular updates throughout the session. Probably starting out a little bit less frequently, and then when we get into the deep part of it, we'll probably hear from us every single time.
Good.
The stuff that ultimately ends up making us mad.
Probably.
That's usually how that rolls out. Okay, very good. Anything else with item 1? Anything else on the agenda?
We're gonna do great.
Yeah, correct. Before we move on. So then, as discussed,
I'm
we,
not using my drawing. Any of that.
item 2 was to receive a presentation from the Cedar Chavez Foundation folks, which that lines up with item 8. So we're gonna postpone item 2 on the work session because we're postponing item 8 on the regular agenda, okay? And then, so next up, Mr. Deckman is to discuss code amendments relating to the recreational vehicle parks and manufactured home communities.
Merry Christmas, everyone. My gift to you is that we get to talk about RV park one more time in 2024.
Coal, give us a lump of coal.
I'm here to just spread cheer, Mayor, just lots of cheer.
Yeah.
So
And you're
these
so
were,
good at it.
aren't I though?
Yes, you are.
So these are the directions that council gave us when the last RV park on the 363 was approved. Go back to the drawing board, look at code, identify what we want to change, if y'all have given us ideas, what you would like to see. That gives us the results that we want to see as a community. So there's a couple things that's going to get into. There's the Unified Development Code, which governs the process of reviewing and approving the RV parks. Then there's chapter 31, which gives a little bit more specific guidance about how they're supposed to be developed. We'll start with talking about the process. So right now, if you look at our use table, there's a column that says which zoning an RV park is allowed in. Ag requires CUP, nowhere else. If you look at other uses, you go over to the far right on that table, there's a list of column that says standards. If you want to open a transitional or social service shelter, there's a standard. If you want to open a liquor store, there's a list of standards. We don't have a list of standards for RV parks. So these are what we're talking about is adding, those are the standards that are going to be considered and presented to you when these come forward. The first one, look at proximity. We discussed this during our last workshop, that we wouldn't set a firm distance. You can't build one RV park within 400 feet of each other, or that it has to be more than a mile. We don't know what that right distance is, and the right distance really is going to be subject to the specific area that's proposed. If, say, there was the railroad yard in Temple, of which there's a couple, there's an RV park on one side of the railroad yard, somebody wanted to put another one quarter mile away. Do we care? Probably not. Who's going to be disturbed? The boxcars? In that case, it could be closer. If there's a lot of upscale residential development, then that distance is going to be different. So what staff will do is provide a map that will show the nearest existing parks. We looked at Corps of Engineer campgrounds, RV parks, mobile home parks. There's one in Temple over there by Bird Creek that's a combination, has both RVs and mobile homes. So I've mapped those. We'll show those on a map. You can take into consideration what's around it and what's the nearest development. So that's the first one. The second one is provide a copy of their rules. I've looked at the rules. You know, we showed you some examples during the last workshop. They're mostly the same and they're mostly common sense. There's a few that are what I call from my Army days, the raccoon and the latrine rule. If you see a sign that says no raccoons allowed in the latrine, you know that somebody did something crazy and they had to make a rule about it. From the parks that I visited, they said, all of them said they started out with a very simple set of rules. And if you look at them, there's a lot of similarities, but then there's unique cases in each one. As they go, they add rules as they need. So we're not telling them what their rules need to be. We can provide examples of rules that we've been provided with, but we're asking them to have that in their thought process at the beginning of their development. They can always add to it later. They don't need to come back, but we want to see what their thoughts are for their rules, how they're going to run their part right at the beginning.
Jason, can they then delete rules as time goes on without our oversight?
It's a great question. My first answer is we wouldn't stop them from changing their rules.
I didn't say change, I said delete.
Delete, right. Would we stop them from scaling back their rules? I don't know that we would.
I
but
mean, I'm
think
not
it's
trying
an
to be
interesting question.
nitpicky, but if the point of having, if that we're gonna,
Mhm.
we're gonna accept it because the rules are there and a year later ownership changes or rules, you know, it goes out the window.
It's a great question. I don't have, it wasn't a question that I'm prepared to answer. If I would speak extemporaneously, I think Mayor, you had said it, or maybe it was Councilmember Walker. One of y'all had said, we don't want to get in the business of running the RV parks.
No.
Remember me who that was, but I remember that was said. We don't want to run their park for them. A conditional use permit does have a clause that says if it's becoming a nuisance, council has the right to revoke the permit. So I would say, again, speaking off the top of my head, if it changes ownership and we see the rules that are in place now are not the rules that were adopted, it certainly is something to come back to code compliance. And we're gonna look at Kathy or Brian for their thoughts, you know, that we could throw a flag on the play, bring them back in, that either the rules need to be enforced, strengthened, or the threat of revocation of the CUP is out there. So that's just,
No, I appreciate,
Mine don't.
I appreciate the conversation. I just think we
Yeah.
think about that a little bit.
no, it's really is a great question.
And what I've noticed is, like I said, most of them are common sense, most of them are similar about trash, loud music, revving engines. Anything that would be a disturbance in any other neighborhood is going to be a disturbance in our. So most of the rules.
So then if they're not enforcing that, it becomes in some ways a PD issue to an extent.
Similar. The difference between a PD and the CUP, you still have the list of conditions, you still have the site plan. It's easier, council has the right to revoke the CUP.
Yes, but it's easier to call the police.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's easy.
That PD, sorry, I'm still stuck on.
That's
that.
okay. Chief is not happy with me saying it's easier to call the police.
So yeah, I mean, that's something we could consider.
We call Buford or the police.
So another idea is percolating out of the top of my head is that the language in the ordinance that says the rules are attached to this ordinance as exhibit B. Again, we're not telling them what those are, but perhaps we can craft language in there to say, if it appears that the rules are not being enforced or that the rules have been loosened to a degree that's become a nuisance, that is grounds for council to revoke the CUP. So maybe there's some legal boilerplate language that we can put in there. It says, again, we're not telling you what your rules have to be, but you have to have something, you have to enforce them. Is that, Kathy, is that kind of a reasonable?
We can work on
Yeah.
language. I think just that boilerplate would be a little bit risky because then it would leave it up to one person's interpretation of what's too loosely, you know,
Right.
and could be dangerous. But I think we could, if there were specific provisions in the rules that council felt strongly about, you know, we could point that out.
Mhm.
You know, if you don't enforce this particular rule, or if you don't, or if you remove this rule from the requirements, then we can bring it back for a review. Or, I mean,
Yeah.
that's definitely something we can think about. And, you know, ultimately, it's going to be council's decision. Do they want us to be enforcing their rules or not? And if so, then we can find a way to do that lawfully.
I mean, part of that is obviously not, I was joking when I said we call chief to a degree. But some of the things we talked about at some point, somewhere in this topic, somebody talked about laundry hanging out and that kind of thing. We're not calling the police because they decide to hang out laundry now. But, and we certainly don't want to run everything, but we do want to keep some visual controls.
And that's definitely something that we can find a way to do if that's, to whatever extent that the council wants to see that control. We can definitely work on that.
So the last bullet that also I think we'll have some discussion and strong feelings about is the TIA. You know, Brian and I talked about this internally just from my planner standpoint. I reached out to Public Works and, you know, talked to TxDOT during the review of the previous case. And what we're recommending is the applicant has to submit a traffic impact analysis. We want to see, does there need to be turn lanes? I think we all agree from a non-engineer standpoint, knowing the unique characteristics of that towed trailer or that, you know, 30-foot long motorhome. They speed up, slow down, and turn differently than the regular car. So that needs consideration. So require the turn lanes. The engineering side is going to determine how long those turn lanes need to be, given the curve, the slope, the speed limit on the road. Is that a 400-foot turn lane? Is that an 800? You know, the TIA is going to tell you that. Does it need an additional center turn? What other requirements are needed? What are the impacts for that part on that road? Show us the engineering in-house.
Do we want to do that on all streets or require that on any street or just?
As of
pick
right
the
now,
highways?
that's where we're leaning towards. But like I said, open to discussion on that one.
That conversation came up with one of the applicants.
it came up.
Yeah, you remember that. And as Jason just talked about the speed of traffic pulling around and that kind of thing, or not stopping.
Right.
most of them probably will be on a little bit more. maybe.
Exactly.
Right.
The other thing to think about is that, you know, I can't remember if you said it in what, which previous workshop we were in, but I think, you know, we talked a little bit about wanting to encourage high quality development and that things like, paving roadways and things like that, kind of naturally cause the self-selection of only developers who are going to build a higher quality development being willing to pursue kind of a gatekeep, if you will, a little bit. And this is, I think, to me, this is another area that if you get a developer who's not willing to do the TIA, you're probably dealing with a developer who is really not looking to or potentially willing to do the type of quality that you might be looking for in these types of development. So something else to keep in mind.
So with that being said, the TIA would be conducted by the developer, either if they're an engineer themselves or an engineer that they would hire. And we did reach out to Belton Engineering. They have been the applicant that is bringing RV Parks. Is Lena online? Do we know? Was she able to join? I know when I talked to her yesterday, she said she was gonna be out of town, but she was gonna try to join while traveling.
There's nobody by the name of.
Okay. What she shared with me when I told her this is where we're headed is that requirement for a TIA. She asked y'all to consider the timing of when the TIA needs to be submitted. If you approach the CUP as a zoning process, that's the land use we want to allow here. She has to consider the TIA to come after the CUP, but prior to the subdivision or the building permits. That if I get the zoning in place, then I'm free to move forward, then I'm happy to spend the money on the TIA, knowing that I've got my entitlement. I can, and I'll be honest, I can see that both ways. I can see, let's get the CUP, let's say that the answer is yes, and let's get the details afterwards. But I can also see the need to identify that traffic impact, the spacing. If the TIA is going to tell you you need 1,000-foot long turn lanes because you're on a state highway and your property frontage is only 200 feet long, something's got to give. And it wouldn't make sense to approve the CUP if that TIA is going to require something that they don't have the ability. So I'll admit in front of y'all, I'm of two minds of when the TIA should be required. I'm open for discussion on that.
Can they, if that happened the second way, that they had our CUP, but they couldn't make the TIA work, would that subdivision or would that RV park be stuck with that CUP, or would it revert back to?
The CUP would just be in place.
But they can't
But
build it.
they can't build it, so the underlying zoning would remain active. If they decided that since the CUP is not usable, and then the next developer decided that what they wanted to do, they'd come in for that rezoning, and that would erase.
So I can see, I mean, going that way, I don't know what it would hurt to do the C. I would not want, if I had the property, I would want to do the traffic impact analysis and spend that money and then come in and council say, we don't want it there. We don't care what your TI says. I wouldn't want to go backwards like that, but if you go the other way, it basically makes it makes it no good anyway if they can't do what they need to with the traffic.
What we're
Is there-
requiring
That
them
makes
to be
sense.
able to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what do we lose by, I don't mean, what do we lose by doing that?
I think what you lose, and I apologize to Brian, because we haven't had a chance to talk about this, maybe just about this already. What
My
we lose
question was
is the
gonna be,
council
and this
loses.
may help you with this answer too, it's maybe it will confuse you more, or not that you're confused, it'll
Try me.
make it more
Oh,
confusing.
definitely we are.
But, what if anything, and this also might be for Richard, or, what if anything in the traffic impact analysis would council need to see to make a decision on whether or not you would consider a CUP. Then that might inform your decision of if you needed the CUP before if you needed the TIA before approving the CUP, or you could just say, as long as you have a TIA and you implement it, then we are going to approve the CUP in advance. And then if they can't implement it, then obviously that just cancels out their ability to move forward. Is there anything in the TIA that would be helpful to council in your mind
Service attorney.
to,
One thing I would say, in my past life, there was, I think it was City of Cedar Park had a requirement for a traffic impact analysis. And what ended up happening inevitably is that every TIA said you needed a right turn lane. So we got into a posture where the statement was, what if I just agree that we're just gonna put a right turn lane in it on every one of these? So the other thing that you might tackle is to say, realistically, the two things that we're talking about here are, is there a left center turn lane that allows a safe movement off of the road, making a left turn? And is there a capability to decelerate coming into the development and accelerate leaving? So those are your three things that a TIA is going to tell you. Left turn lane, acceleration, deceleration. So the other piece is just to say, is it such that you just say, here's the things that are required? You have to address deceleration, you have to address acceleration, you have to address the left turn movement, because we can all understand a standard 4-lane road or a standard 2-lane road is not going to give you enough protection for a left turn coming into an RV park, regardless of speed limit. You don't want a 40-foot trailer sitting in the middle of the road. So then the left turn lane is a necessity for all RV parks, in my opinion. The right turn lane, they need to be able to get out of the street so that they can slowly make a wide right turn coming into development. So that's probably a necessity. So really you're down to, is acceleration necessary or not? Lots of cases that acceleration lane doesn't become necessary. So I think the third option, kind of the hybrid of this, is maybe you do away with the TIA, no TIA, and say the requirement is you put the turn lanes in regardless, or provide a TIA that says why you don't have to.
And what about for the acceleration? You said sometimes that's needed. Do you put that in, or is that? You say you have to put that in unless you get a TI that says you don't need it?
Yeah, is there a shoulder? Is there not a shoulder? Those kind of things can come in where you may not have to do an acceleration lane, but I think, short of a TIA, if you just said, here's the three requirements: deceleration lane, acceleration lane, left turn lane. If you have all of those things, then you're probably good.
What else is there in a TIA, that would be beneficial to the decision-making process? I mean, I know a lot of times we talk about, trips per day, right, Brian? I think that y'all have, information about that. And I don't, it's an RV park. I think you can.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily something that would be necessary information to get from a TIA. But I guess what I'm trying to say, Dave, is I think you're making a great point. What can we standardize versus requiring them to drop another 15 to 25 grand? And what else is there in the TIA that we need to consider standardized?
Right. So really the only things you're looking at is the volume of traffic, how much volume is there?
Yeah.
And there's estimates for those numbers, to your point, pretty accurate estimates, specifically when you get into something that's a really specific use, like an RV park, or if you had a single family, an SF1 zoning. But that kind of goes away for the RV park piece of it, because realistically, 99% of the time, short of looking at a several 100-acre RV park, 99% of the time, your concern on an RV park isn't the volume that's coming in and out of it. Mm-hmm. It's whether or not the large vehicle can safely get off the road and into the park, and leave the park and get on it. Those are the two things you're concerned with. So your only information that you're getting out of a TIA is what turn lanes have to be in place. That's,
So if you just say you always need them, then you don't have, it takes out the unknown and a
right.
$15,000 piece of paper.
And I think most anybody pulling in and leaving an RV park appreciates the fact that there's some kind of a place to get off the highway and some kind of a place to get on the highway, so to speak.
The one thing I would add to the traffic volume, what we found in this area is most of our parks, they're not tourist in nature, they're residential. So they're here for work, they're parking the RV. The RV is not coming in and out of the park every day. That's the impact that we're most concerned. If it's just them on their, their pickup truck or their motorcycle, however they get to work, that's no different than any other residential development. We can handle that traffic. We're used to that type of traffic. It's the impact of when those RVs are coming out. They don't move as frequently. So I would say if we're gonna do the traffic volume, the RV park calculation is gonna be lower. It's a lower trip gen rate. But if we treat it like a residential, equivalent number of single family homes, couple trips a day per pad as they leave for work and come back, any deliveries that are come on based on the number of residents.
Well, then the question that we're asking is, do you hold them to a higher standard so that that park has the flexibility to either be a park that doesn't have a lot of in and out daily, people coming in for a long weekend or spending a week here and hauling the trailer in and out, or do you allow for a consideration? So if you go more just the standard TIA route, what you're probably going to get is specifics for how they plan to operate at day one, but that doesn't mean that in 5 years it's still going to be operated that way. It may be operated differently. So the higher traffic counts for trailers come into play rather than a lower traffic count for trailers. So that, I think that's the where we move the needle from the council perspective is you say, we'd rather be more conservative in what we plan for to allow for traffic, and somebody may have to spend more money to do that. Or can they do the study, set some really specific parameters and move that needle back the other way and maybe not construct those improvements?
I like that approach.
I was just telling Brian, we had a residential project down off 93 that was going to connect to State Road. TxDOT typically requires the TIA with their entrance permit. And the developer just said, look, we'll just build your turn lanes. And TxDOT waived the requirement for the TIA.
Because they would build the turn.
Because they were just going to build it. So David's idea, I think, is very consistent with how we treated other developments.
Is council okay with that? All right.
Okay.
Like we got.
Moving on.
Thank y'all.
So the second part is chapter 31. Once we've approved the development, how does it get built? The first part is just clean up the sections of code. There's parts in 31-4 that says we can inspect. 31-14 says you can't have permit. 31-15 says you gotta have the registry. Those three things are very closely connected. So the first idea is just put the things that go together next to each other in the code. Just make it clear what's inspectable, make it clear. The second one, there was quite a bit of discussion on this, is whether or not to allow long-term occupancy. Right now, the code prohibits permanent residency. We're not talking about a long permanent residency, but we are talking about allowing long-term occupancy. So maybe it's more than 180 days, maybe it's 9 months, maybe it's a year. And then staff went through thought process of what are the cases where someone would need to stay there longer? And this is what we came up with. The first one is what we've seen already, employment. People are here to work. Second one, if you're here on military orders. And it was comical, Brian had to point that out to me, the veteran of the bunch. What if they're here for the Army? Oh, yeah, that's right, they would do that.
Successfully block that out of your mind.
Something, yeah. I'm retired, that's behind me now. Never. Yeah, and then how to document that. They have an employment contract. The Army or the Navy or the Air Force will give you travel orders that tells you you have to be here. The other one would be if they can show that they are here because they have a family member that's in the hospital, they're a caregiver, you know, maybe end of life care for a parent. They need to be here, but they also need someplace to stay for their own respite. Or it could be someone that's a park host or a park employee that stays at the park. We can tell you, Bel Air Junction, they have a 2-story office. The park manager lives upstairs. So that person is on site all the time. Now you could argue, okay, that's permanent occupancy. The code doesn't strictly kind of allow that. So let's make that explicit. And that would be listed on the guest register. If you're here just for a weekend, your weekend. If someone has asked for and shown that they qualify for the extended stay, that's marked on the register. When the city representative, whoever that may be, comes out to inspect, looks at the register. Okay, you've got 5 permanent. But I can look over and remember the last time I was here 10 months ago, that same trailer and that same person, that same Harley was parked right there. So there can be some, you know, accountability to that system. And then we talked about how, if it's not a listed exception, I mean, we would list fees in the code. These are what qualifies you to stay there longer than 6 months. I won't say this is the final answer. Who authorizes the extension? Does it come to the council? Is it approved by P&Z? Is it a formal process or is it an informal process? Does it start with Brian? Does it go all the way to Brent? I think Bren's probably gonna tell me I'm crazy and she doesn't want to deal with it.
When he had this slide earlier, he had city manager on there and I said no, and he's got planning development director on there and he's still trying to get me to do it.
Right, Jason, what about,
I wanna do that.
hospital residents, doctor residents, medical school residents?
Sure,
That would be
They're not-
employment.
I would say that's employment.
Oh, that's employment, okay.
Mhm. I think you were talking about a medical professional.
I was, but
Yeah.
also medical students are not employment.
Well, they're kind of considered
Like,
residents.
yeah, there's
They're
probably
hopefully-
still some contract in the school and.
They're getting paid. They're
Yeah.
not paying.
No, the residents are not the students.
No, I know, but.
Students are paying them,
Yeah.
not getting money back.
Right. So,
Mom and daddy are paying them. It just, I mean, students do come from elsewhere and need places to live. As
Sure.
Banner Scott and White Medical School grows.
Then get into college merit.
True, you're right. Just something to think about.
How about this after house?
Sorry, sir?
How about this after? There's people from a tornado still living in RV.
Yeah,
Good
disaster.
example.
That would be employment contract.
No, if they're displaced.
Oh, displaced. I'm sorry. Yes, yes,
And I
yes,
think
yes.
that's
Yeah.
why we wanted to have some process. I'm
Yeah.
kind of joking, but I think there does need to be another exception, you know, because to the point of, you know, right now we've got, with the tornado, we would need a process for that to go, you know, either to staff or to, I think the point is we can't think of every possibility of why,
Right.
someone may need to exceed, a short-term stay. And so we would like to, our recommendation at the staff level is to list out those things that we would generally find acceptable, like employment contract, military orders, and then have some process for those other items that, you know, that need to be considered. And I think if y'all are okay with that, we, probably what we need to hear from you, do you want to delegate that to staff? Or do you want all of those decisions to come to you? Or, and I will delegate it to somebody else. I will delegate it to Brian. Or do you want it to go to a board like P and Z or, you know, what is, do y'all have a preference?
I think our staff's gonna be professional enough, somebody in planning doesn't.
I think it's worth interjecting, Kyle, you had, when we were looking at this, and I'm gonna put words in your mouth, correct me if I paraphrase you incorrectly. That if we list if we give a laundry list of exemptions, we pretty much open the floodgates and you're trusting the park management
Yes.
that they're giving authorized exemptions that are actually authorized. They're not saying, oh yeah, no, he's here for work. Is he though? If there's something in the code that indicates there's a formal process, you're gonna keep the honest people honest, generally speaking.
So more formal than a staff, a city staff.
Well, even just to say they have to come to staff,
Yeah.
if
Oh, I
it's
think
not
we
one of
should
the
have
few
that.
listed.
I think you should know
Yeah.
somebody. at the
Yeah.
city's-
Right, and also it creates that paper trail, because like we've
Right.
got employment contract, military orders, hospitalization, park host, park employee. You've got documents that they can have in their book to show, yes, we gave, this fits one of your exceptions. Other exceptions such as, being displaced while your house is being rebuilt from the tornado damage. You may not have any real good paperwork to prove that, but if you've got, the exception administratively decided, they will have that in their book.
Another example that if it were to come to me, I just thought of this, that I would say is probably warranted if somebody is building a house.
True.
So, and we have a contract that gives the timeline to say, yeah, you're coming here regardless. You don't have a place to live here, but you are trying to make your home here. I would say that's warranted.
So in the interest of keeping us moving along, generally idealized, if staff can kind of come up with a list of things that would be kind of automatic approvals, and then some process that goes to a staff member for approval is fine with y'all? Okay, thank you.
And then last, just a couple, very specific requirements for the code for the development. You can talk about those if you want. I do kind of want to keep it moving though. We've got some other cases that are coming up that I want to make y'all aware of.
Some more.
I would like to talk, sorry,
Yeah.
there's the minimum separation of 300 feet. And so that's essentially the property line. It's not a setback. It's reserving property for future development. So it's a buffer, but it also addresses the concern about, hey, this, maybe in the market, this is fine now, but we also may not want to fill developable properties with RV parks. So where, other development then happens and we're missing a grocery store or whatever. So that's what that attempts to address.
300 feet's enough?
That's kind of your minimum depth for functional, non-residential.
Right.
But I mean, that
Yeah.
can be discussed too.
So we're on slide 4 of 22.
I have extra slides that I don't intend to use unless they're needed.
Okay, can you fly through and let's
Yes.
end this session at 3:30. Because Tracy needs to cover something with us and then we have executive session.
We got 6 minutes.
So,
Yeah, 6 minutes.
so find a good stopping point between now and 3:30.
The mayor would like to hear this, the land lease communities, that's not intended to be addressed right now. So we could skip
Is
over.
that part of the 22 slides?
We don't
Yeah,
have
I
any
can-
projects waiting
Okay.
for land lease communities, so we can end at RV park.
Yeah, we'll end on this one. So these are the cases that are coming forward. So Gary Road was submitted shortly after the one on Loop 363. At the applicant's request has been held in limbo till we come to agreement. The annexation and the next one on Fulton Highway 36. The annexation has to proceed the RV park, but that's the same property. Those have been submitted. But still, right now, they're templated for the January 6th P and Z for that RV, both RV parks. And then the annexation in both RV parks will come to the council on January 60th.
Okay.
If you're comfortable with that the code changes are coming, we'd like to bring these cases forward to keep them moving.
Either both.
Yes,
For both what?
all three of these
Both
cases, yeah, Belton Engineering has the annexation and both RV parks.
So how far is the dairy from the one we just approved?
Actually have a map for that. So that would be the map that we would present to you with the CUP. So Dairy Road is on the lower left. It was 0.9 miles Straight line distance, 1.7 miles driving distance.
If we continue to work through getting these changes codified, council, are we heading in the right direction? And are we okay to move some of these forward, incorporating it with conditions as we continue to get it? Or do we want to continue to hold until we get everything buttoned up in the code?
If we do conditions along with approval, if we're doing those simultaneously, are we moving the target for these that are already in the queue? Or are we possibly moving the target?
Well, the reason that we are bringing this to you on the last meeting in 2024 and forcing you to talk about it is because you guys gave us a direction that you wanted to see and you wanted to put people on notice. So I think everyone is properly on notice that changes are in the works.
We're not moving the target for these guys.
No, I
Okay,
not.
as long as we're not doing that, I'm fine.
What we are doing, I've already got written in the conditions and let Bethany
Okay.
know that one of the conditions was gonna be the TIA or is one, there's already some termites there, that there's a requirement to show us your rules.
Yeah.
So we're already baking that into the conditions on these, even though it's above and beyond what the minimum code requirement. We're showing that we're listening to you and like you said, they're on notice of what the elevated requirements are until they can be baked into code.
Okay, that's fine.
I have a question for you on your map.
Yes.
Should we show all the existing and proposed departments?
We could could show the map of all of them.
Like which one?
Oh, no, that's, yes.
Does what now?
Oh, because it could be one that's closer between. them.
Yes.
So we have the one down on the loop.
We would absolutely show.
There's one up
Yes.
on the
Yeah.
loop.
Yeah, no, I can expand the view of the map.
Okay, very good. And this is a good stopping point?
I think this is a good stopping point. Did I make 3:30? You'll get 3
You did.
minutes.
You did.
I got extra slides. Let's keep going.
Right, very good. And I don't mean to be rude, we're just.
Understood, understood, but we get into the weeds on this stuff.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to item 4, and we'll receive from Ms. Bernard a presentation on the disabled veterans exemption information as a follow-up to the legislative update on November 21st, 2024.
Brenda, did you want to make any opening comments about as far as this on our legislative agenda?
Just as a reminder that this is one of the 12 priority areas that you will consider adopting tonight when you adopt the legislative program or it's related to, which is to expand out the communities that are considered eligible for essentially the Maypole funding that the state provides for communities that are disproportionately affected by the statewide benefit that's offered to our disabled veterans in the way of partial or full property tax exemptions. When we presented the legislative update or the legislative draft a couple of weeks ago, there were some questions about this topic, and Tracy and her staff in particular, Miranda, who has a lot of experience with this, has done some very detailed analysis. And I think that this will be really helpful for all of us to understand as we go into advocating and talking about this issue with our legislative delegation. But I think what Tracy will share with you tonight is that the city of Temple is actually already eligible for the program. Is that correct, Tracy? So the legislation that is filed, again, it's not necessarily because it provides a direct benefit to us, although it will, if the benefit will be in the budget, the portion of it, if they can get the allocation that goes towards making communities whole increase, that will be what impacts us. But I still think that overall it should be considered I stand by our recommendation here through the legislative task force because through the county, making, just protecting our county as a whole is very important for, not just for us individually, but for entities throughout the county and the county.
Thank you, Brent. Also, thank you, Miranda, for putting this together for us. If I fumble, she'll hopefully pick me up if I mess up. Just some history. In 2009, as a legislative session, HB 3613 was approved to be effective January 2010. The significance of that was there was the DB 1 through 4 different levels of exemption, but this session approved the 100% disabled and and to be totally exempt. If they're 100%, it exempt their whole homestead. 2015 was some other significant legislation. That is the legislation that was passed that would make or taxing entities whole for the exemption if they met this criteria. The amount of lost ad valorem tax is equal to or greater than 2%. Of the local government's general fund revenue for the fiscal year, if the municipality is adjacent to a U.S. military installation, and that a criteria that you must file by April 1 of the first year following the end of the fiscal year in order to be entitled to the veteran assistance payment, and you must submit an independent audit with your application.
Tracy, can I interrupt you here really quickly? So if you'll go back one slide. So the 3 bills that have been 3 or 4 bills that have been filed related to this topic. What they seek to do is change that second sub bullet point from a municipality adjacent to a U.S. military installation to change the language to a municipality that's located within a county that has a U.S. military installation or a neighboring county. And so that is what the amendment would do. Incoming Representative Hickland's bill does more than that. It adds more restrictions on what we can do with our tax rate. So I think we would prefer Senator Flores and Representative Chair Buckley's bill version, which is more clean. But I think the other one that was filed by another legislator in a different area matches Buckley's and Senator Flores's bill. And then there'll be a companion, as we mentioned last time, kind of a budget amendment. That's not what they call it, but a budget amendment item that would then increase it. So that's the change that's on the table.
Can I ask a general question before we move on? So I think, Tracy, you said that the veterans exemption was about a $3 million hit in lost revenue, roughly, to the city. Do you already go over that?
No, I will.
Okay. Well, but what my question about that is then is what impact does that have on the 3.5% cap?
Mayor, that is a hard question to answer.
Okay.
This speaks to it in some. I would have to look at how the things come in and out,
Sure.
how that actually impacts that.
But it will impact 3.5%.
Yes,
I mean, it seems like you could, it seems like you would then your possible increase would have to be less, right? If the council were to want to increase the tax rate, it would impact the amount that the tax rate could be increased because you have, I know it's not an extra, you're being made whole in this case at that 3%. Or is it the opposite of that?
It's complicated in that formula,
Okay.
and I need to study it, but it is a very valid, relevant.
All right.
And I don't want to tell you wrong without
Okay.
playing with the numbers.
All right. That's fine.
I'm sorry, does this mean town growth or disabled veteran growth within the town?
The disabled veteran growth.
So Temple's disabled veteran growth is 29.41%.
That's a 3-year average growth.
Of the disabled residents, veteran residents.
Ask that one more time.
It's a 29% growth of residents in Temple who are disabled veterans.
To have the exemption.
That's what it's grown from year to year. It grew by 29%. And I have some
Yeah,
numbers.
but it again is the disabled veteran population
Yes.
growth, not the overall.
Yes.
I got it. Thank
Yes,
you.
totally.
Go to the beginning of your presentation and start,
Yes, sir.
please.
Okay, we went through that, and then just the exemption amounts, there's different tiers based on different percent of disability. The low is a exemption amount of 5,000, it goes up to the 12,000. And then if you're 100% disabled, you get the 100% of the value of your home exempt. But this also, if you're over 65 in DV1, if you have the over 65 exemption, DV1 through DV4, you automatically get the $12,000 exemption.
So it doesn't matter once you hit the 100%, it doesn't matter the value of your house, you don't pay any taxes.
Right.
But up to that, it's dollar amounts. That's
Or the 12,000.
Based on your percent of disability. And I think this, if this exceeded the value of, no, it's just a flat amount, not a percent. Is that correct?
Correct.
That make,
if you have a big house, that could be a big jump from 99% to 100.
yes, huge jump. This is just going in to show where the majority of the exemptions are, a big portion in the 100%. This is a lot of numbers just showing the different categories and where each one, just based on number of exemptions, but you do see the growth in those exemptions of the 100%. Especially,
It's the 100%.
yes, and there's
Oh, DV ones. Yes, yes, yes.
this light blue
Yeah, yeah,
of the totally
yeah.
100%.
Is that because of is that partially because of the veterans home that was built, that homes?
There wasn't a whole lot of those.
Sanjanet's,
No,
There-
I
no,
will say that,
no.
that was 13 units. I would
Yeah.
say that has
Okay.
nothing, no meaningful
all right,
impact on this.
yeah.
And that last chart where you were showing the increase, was that in Temple specific, or is that
That's Temple,
including the bar chart below?
yes.
That's represented. Got it.
There's 3,838 individual exemptions in one of those categories.
Right. Wow.
When, 2011, there was 1,377.
Yeah, well, we've had Iraq since then.
Going forward. This is a chart on the value, taxable value, not the dollars of the growth. And again, starting to see that growth there. Again, busy chart, but it just shows you what it looked like in 2000. From 2010 to 2015, it was estimated loss of revenue. And then in FY 2016 forward, shows where we could get, if you met those criteria, you could get relief from the state of Texas or reimbursed for a portion of that. And this is 2024 and the calculated for 2025. This would use some assumptions, what considered conservative if the growth continued. This could be the possible loss of revenue way out in the future, pretty steep growth. And then this is getting into the calculation, and we did it last week, or last council, November. Did some calculations on what, if Temple qualified on the 2%. And Miranda pulled out the actual form on how you fill out the application. And it does not include intergovernmental revenues in the statute, meaning any kind of grants. You don't count that in the calculation. But in 2024, we are greater than 2% of the general fund revenues amount that's eligible for reimbursement.
And so if you're greater than 2%, you're eligible for full reimbursement, not just everything above 2%. Is that right?
It's either, you gotta
assuming-
meet that
assuming you
threshold to even
qualify.
get any reimbursement.
Say again,
You gotta be greater than the 2% to
Uh-huh.
get a reimbursement.
but then they go all the way back and you'd be eligible for full reimbursement, not just everything over 2%.
That sets the threshold of whether you get it or you don't get it.
Right. But if you meet the threshold, then you get it out. Go back one slide. There. 2% is the 2.374.
Yes,
And so the city of Temple wouldn't be the city of Temple would be eligible for the 2.491, not the difference between 2.491 and 2.374.
correct.
Correct? Yeah. Okay, got it. You hit the threshold, you get it all.
If you're
Well, you don't-
eligible, you can,
Actually, we don't get any of it.
One
But-
1.99 gets nothing and 2 gets 2%.
Depends upon the size of the.
Right.
Right.
So.
Right. And if you're
if you-
qualified by
if-
being adjacent.
Right, which we do. So what we had previously not qualified for was last year was the first year we exceeded the 2%.
Okay.
So 24 going forward, we have got the 2%. We are adjacent. So we're not in the boat like Parker Heights, which has long qualified with the 2%, but is not adjacent. So
We're
now
Adjacent.
I'm gonna show you.
Tracy has a map. Yeah, the little tree. Cause we own, we have some lake in our,
We
in our
didn't
city
do like a
boundaries.
hostile takeover of anybody. Yeah.
Yes, we did. Actually, we did.
Okay,
But-
sorry, Tracy.
But this goes back, the heart of the issue is that I think, there is only, is it 12 million total? I'm looking at Miranda like she just knows, and I don't know.
There
if she
will
knows.
only be 10.5 million to split across the state, so it'll be a very small portion. So it will only likely be able to get roughly 18 to 20% of the amount
So
that we apply for.
So in theory, you could get 2.4,
Understood.
but because the state hasn't allocated very much towards the make whole money, they take whoever is eligible and then they proportionally reduce what you get by the amount that they've allocated.
And just to throw this, just to
Yes.
throw this in,
Okay.
Comptroller Hager was out at Drake McLean's office earlier in the week. I heard him speak, and I don't think, it doesn't sound like that allocation is going to go up much.
And so the problem is that
Exactly.
naturally, I mean, Parker Heights will never qualify unless an amendment to the bill is passed that changes who qualifies. But there will be more communities like Temple who will qualify eventually once their impact reaches 2% or more. And so now we, for example, are entering a pool that was already strained. And so communities like Killeen and Bell County and Coppers Cove, who were already eligible and were already getting it, they're now gonna get less next year because we get some without, and there has been no meaningful addition to, and I think they tried to go up to 20 million maybe last session, and that got, that's part of what got killed. I don't know that, the last time I saw the bill, the fiscal note wasn't on it.
Right.
But it is going to be probably a significant fiscal note, and when you have a bill with a significant fiscal note,
It does.
it's harder. The more money it costs, of course, the harder it is to do. And I don't know if there's any, I don't know what, if any, appetite there is in just seeing more money go towards the communities that already qualify. So in all the conversations that I've ever been in around this, the focus seems to be on getting a change to the law that would qualify more communities. and that's important for Harker Heights and Nolanville, for example, as two in our county. But what's important for Temple and Killeen and Bell County and Coryell County and Coppers Cove is not adding more people to the eligibility list. It is increasing the amount of money that the state, for the program that they offer, right now it's an unfunded program or largely unfunded. So if in our legislative efforts, the primary impact is that, if as you're talking with our legislative delegation or just community leaders or whoever you are talking to, what directly helps Temple is more money in the make-whole budget. Which indirectly helps Temple by just helping the county is getting Harker Heights and Nolanville by the bills that have been filed. Again, they don't help us, they help Nolanville and Harker Heights. But if they are passed without the budget getting passed, they will actually hurt us.
Yep.
So I think we just wanted, I appreciate, I've already told Tracy and Miranda this. I really appreciate the very detailed analysis that Miranda performed. I think it's very helpful. It makes it very clear, I think, what our target is, which is, again, for Temple specifically, we need more money in the make-whole provision. And then secondarily, it's support for something that would help our neighbors. And I think it's also important that and I would be remiss, I think, if I didn't say this right now, and that I would encourage you to say it as you're talking to folks about this issue, is that our message, our belief is that the program itself is not under attack. We do not have any issue with the fact that we have this great program in place that the state adopted that provides this benefit to our warriors. That is not the issue. And the proposed changes are not to repeal the program. They are to encourage the state to provide the funding to fund the program that they adopted. And not so that it should not affect the veterans at all, except for the fact that if we continue on the path that we are on right now, it does affect veterans, because as they live in the community here with us, and as we don't have 2.5 million, and next year it's projected to be 3 point something, and then as we get to 2040, which Tracy says is a long time from now, and I say we'll be here before we know it, that's police officers not able to hire to serve the houses and the communities in which our veterans live along beside all of us. So that is why it is so important to say we support this program, and we've got to encourage the state to fund it appropriately. I think that message can get misheard. So I think it's important to say it is not about taking the benefit away from the veterans. It's about asking the state to properly fund it.
And I don't think we have the appetite for it from the last couple of visits we've had with Patrick and Hager. I don't think it's high on the list of priorities.
There's a whole lot more representatives whose communities are not affected than those that are.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Go ahead, Tracy.
Again, just the way the calculation in 24 is the first year we met the threshold in our greater than the 2% of the general fund revenue. This is 25's calculation at 3.2 million FY 2025, and the 24 is what you'd be able to apply for in April 1, and then this 3.2 million would be in April 1 of 2026. But again, as we go over those, the boxes you got to check. This one here, I wanted to go over adjacent to a U.S. military installation. A few years ago, I was working with the appraisal district and thought in this area that we might touch the Fort Cavazos but then we looked at the formula and we didn't meet the criteria to really go into it deeper. And in the last, when Miranda started working on this and reached out to them again, and they did dig deeper, and then we had, worked with Kelly to validate it on our mapping systems, or however y'all validate it. There is an area, 2.92 miles, where our city limits does touch Fort Cavazos. And so we could check that box.
Where is that?
That's Calahouse Creek right there, right?
I just got this fresh today. I can't check, I can get a more detailed map.
I think it's Cowhouse Creek.
But it doesn't matter, right? As long as you touch.
We know they touch it 3 miles. So,
And that's the city limit, not the ETJ. Then we qualified.
so in that, again, we wouldn't want the legislation to expand it where you gotta touch 5 miles
No.
to exclude us either. Again, a lot of numbers, but if you might just focus on this estimated revenue loss when you compare, this is Temple's 2025. We do meet the threshold. That's a future year 20. Based on this FY's revenue and exemptions, we would qualify for that apply for it in FY 2026. But then we compare that to Kileen's 13.7 million. Harker Heights, which is not adjacent.
Right.
Theirs is more than Temple's at 4.4 million. And then Bell County's is 16.9 million. You add Bell County's, you add Kileen's, you add City of Temple's, and the amount that's available is 10.5 million. That you gotta allocate, proportion that across.
And that's just not for Bell County.
Right,
Yeah,
that's every.
Yeah, that's state.
right, that's for the whole, and
We
now,
can take the whole thing here in Bell County.
right.
Right,
There's,
then some.
yeah, and then El Paso fell into it
exactly.
and lowered it more.
Sure.
And that concludes that presentation.
One question. How is the proportional share of the 10 million, whatever that is in the fund, 10.5 million, whatever that, how's that money meted out?
I would bet that it's weighted based on your
Based upon your
exemption.
amount of loss?
Yes, by each entity, is that how they allocate it?
They allocate it out in an equal percent
Weighted?
to each entity, so they divide the amount out, like, last year it was 27% of the amount that was submitted by each entity. That's how it was allocated
So it
out.
was, okay.
But it'll be less this year
It'll be less.
because again, we qualified El Paso, so that will get less than 27% of the amount that we submit because the money didn't go up.
So will the other people that do, entities that do it now.
Yes.
So there's no definition of how large of an area. We should worry about 2.2 miles of shared border, right? I mean, if you literally touch it with 10 feet, then you're in.
Right now. Right now,
To a US military installation.
unless they rewrite
Adjacent
that,
is in.
which will,
So what's the difference between Hicklin bill and Buckley?
Hicklin is required, in her bill, she is saying that if you, take the, relief, then you are not allowed to, adopt the tax rate that is over the no new revenue tax rate. And when we
Same thing.
visited, with a group about the bills, for example, Coppers Cove city manager was there. And he, was trying to explain, like, for example, last year, Coppers Cove did a tax ratification election because they were struggling, to be able to stay within the voter approval rate and compensate their police and firefighters anywhere near, competitively. So they went to their voters and said, would you approve a tax rate that's over the 3.5% cap in order to allow us to meet this priority? And the voters overwhelmingly came to the table and said yes. And his point was that if your bill was in place, you would actually hurt veterans more because we already get the big coal money, they already qualify. We went to our voters and asked them to allow us to raise the taxes, but the way the bill is drafted is if you raise the taxes, then that year Copper's Cove would not have gotten their share of the make whole money. So in order to accomplish what they wanted to for their police and firefighters, they would have had to calculate an even higher tax rate that voters would have to approve. So instead of accomplishing the goal, which is to not inflate taxes, you would actually have the opposite occur because the citizens of Copper's Cove would have had to pay even more because they would not have gotten whatever they previously had gotten from the state. That would go away for them, at least for that year. So they would have to take on the burden of losing that and raising money. I don't know that that made an impact in her decision, but it was communicated.
I talked to her later and she understood that. I don't know if it had an impact, but she understood.
So when they file a bill, and I just don't understand this part of it at all, can they not file one together? Or did they just have different ideas of what that looked like?
They
Seems like
can file it
together,
together,
it would
yeah.
have more power.
They can file it, you can have, co-authors, you can have sponsors. And I don't, I'm not sure why she chose to file a standalone bill because Buckley as a senior member and chair, had already indicated a lot months and months ago that he was gonna file a bill. So I'm not sure, exactly what went into her decision-making process, but she could have co-signed his bill or filed. There really wouldn't have been a reason to file a separate bill that was exactly the same. Especially since they were working together. So, like jointly authored would have been probably the way, but it sounded like that element was important enough to her to restrict city's ability to raise taxes that she didn't want to sign on to the bill that Dr. Buckley had drafted, which is really very straight. And again, Dr. Buckley, Senator Flores, and then there is one other representative that I cannot recall their name. They don't represent our area. They're down in like the San Antonio area.
Oh, it's shorter.
No, no, it's not. They all filed. There's 3 identical bills, and then there's Hillary's, which is slightly different. And the 3 identical bills, the only thing it does is it says that instead of it having to be adjacent to a military installation, it changes the wording to that the taxing entity has to be located in a county that has a U.S. military installation or a county adjacent to a county that has a U.S. military installation, and then everything else stays the same.
So if it's still 10 million, then it's gonna be not very much for anybody. So
Yes.
More hands.
And both, at least the meeting that I was at, Dr. Buckley personally wasn't able to make it, but he had a staff member there, and Senator Flores was there personally. Both Senator Flores and the staff member from Dr. Buckley's office both said unequivocally that if there's essentially a process where it can be the funding, the budget bill, the line item in the budget, and the bill that requires the funding can be tied together so that if one passes and the other doesn't, that the other part of it becomes void. And they unequivocally said that they would not allow the bill to expand out the authority, the eligibility to pass if the funding didn't come with it. Because again, I don't think any of us want to stand in the way of Parker Heights and Nolanville both have even a more disproportionate, for example, their number, Parker Heights number is higher than ours. But if you think about the proportionality to what size communities are, it's a very significant proportionality for them. So we certainly don't want to harm, we would love to help support them being able to get money. But at the same time, Killeen and Bell County are already struggling with the amount of money that they get. So, it's kind of, you want to help your neighbor, but also not harm yourself at the same time. So it's challenging.
Yep.
Just to point out, just one other interesting number. For example, Harker Heights, their loss of revenue is 4.4 million. And their average growth in value each year, a 3-year average has been about 125.6 million of added exemption. And their new value of property is only 49.5 million. So their loss in the exemptions is double of what they get in new property. And that new property does not go into the 3.5 cap. So it might answer some of that question.
Yeah.
But when Temple, ours is not to that magnitude where we have a lot of new value.
We have the highest new value.
We do.
Amazing. Not amazing, but interesting to see it in
Right.
that perspective.
So it's not like most of these topics for me, it's not a very positive thing because, you know, it's in terms of will there actually be any action taken? Doesn't seem, you know, I'm not optimistic. And I mean, just, I guess all I can say is I'm glad I'm not the city manager of Parker Heights right now because that's a somewhat dire situation and getting worse. And ours isn't, you know, looking that rosy either. So, but it's just, seems very difficult to have the people who can make the change, get it done.
Isn't Nolanville worse than?
It is even worse than Harker Heights from a proportionality.
Yes.
That's
3 or
my-
4 years ago.
At least
that-
it was a couple of years ago. I haven't seen the
Yeah.
current numbers.
I talked to the mayor of Harker Heights about this, and he's no longer the mayor, but 2 or 3 years ago, and that was 30%. The exemption was 30% of their budget. We're talking about 2.5%, right? And we're ticked. It was 30% of theirs.
Function.
Right.
Do you know, and I used to know this from auditing school districts way back a long time ago, but school districts like Clean ISD, Coppers Cove ISD, they got a lot of supplement from the Department of Defense related to military and veterans in the community as federal funding. I don't know if that would ever be a route that you'd ever see,
It seems, yeah.
because of the veterans in the community and what it means, but it might be a route to seek federal.
Some
Yeah.
other states that don't have that
Right.
are gonna wanna shove their money to Texas, because we do.
Yeah, I mean, the hard part is like Texas as a state, we as a state have approved a benefit to our veterans. But we have asked local level to fund it instead of the state funding it. And then at the same time, now you're getting me on my soapbox, then you are tying our hands and saying, but you can't raise the tax rate. And then even when no, actually, I'm stopping there. That's it. Nothing else I say will be helpful. So I will.
But very
Let's talk about
educational.
Right. Thought we were all getting on a soapbox. All right, very good. Everybody, you had lots of questions, still don't know answers. But does anybody have any further questions that will not be answered? Okay, very good. Then let's move on.
What did we not answer?
We got one question we hadn't totally answered.
I think solution.
Solution, that's probably good. Yeah. All right, very good. So it is currently about 5 minutes after 4. At this time, the council entered into executive session to discuss certain economic development matters and potential real property acquisitions. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551072087, and 087, the board may meet in closed session to discuss or deliberate the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property. If deliberation in an open meeting will have detrimental effect on the position of the governmental body in negotiation with a third person. Discuss or deliberate commercial or financial information received from a business prospect that the governmental body seeks to have locate, stay, or expand in or near the city of Temple, and with which the governmental body is conducting economic development negotiations, or to deliberate the offer of a financial or other incentives to such a business prospect. No final action will be taken. Thank you, Mr. Lopez.